Family violence don't turn fatal overnight. It's progressive. Is there a way for us to build this kind of Kampung spirit where whole communities can come together to just support people in crisis? The Open Home Network just began with a shared idea of hospitality and community. It will be very useful to intervene where the community can serve one another and provide safe spaces so that people can feel protected there.
How big is an issue of homelessness in Singapore?
In Singapore, it's a lot more complicated. Hosts are not shelters, they are families, and they provide more than just a space, they provide a relationship. We take on a lot of these challenges because the people matters to us. If it's not going to work out, it doesn't mean you have not succeeded. We help people understand that mess is part of that process, and there is also beauty in that mess.
Today, we have with us the founder of Solve n+1, Kenneth Heng, who started a community-based management consultancy. The company serves businesses, governments, and NGOs, supporting them in their community building endeavours to solve pressing social issues. Solve n+1 is also recognised as a business for good and a social enterprise member of Raise Singapore. In this episode, we talk about Solve n+1's mission and its origin, starting a ground-up initiative, and their advocacy work to combat homelessness and bringing back the Kampung spirit in Singapore through their latest initiative, the Open Home Network. Welcome to our show. Really happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And given the climate now that Singapore is moving towards post-pandemic, what have you observed during the time that you were doing consultancy work for the social sector, pre-pandemic and now?
I think a global crisis like this does bring out the good in people, and it is clear that we have Singaporeans who really care and they are willing to step forward to serve one another and really protect what matters in a time of crisis. So while none of us wish for a pandemic, I think there are certainly silver linings in a situation like that, and that's something that we have observed, and we find this to be quite an exciting time for the kind of issues that we want to address.
Indeed. And among so many career paths, why social enterprise, in particular the area of social impact and advocacy work?
I believe I got into social entrepreneurship by accident. I started serving communities by traveling to different parts of Southeast Asia. I love sitting down with locals, drinking tea and hearing their story. And my journey to starting Solve n+1 began with a project where I met a village chief in Myanmar one day who asked me if I was able to support a hospital that has turned away patients for 2 years. And in that problem statement alone, there's a lot of complexities that I had to navigate, whether the doctors were equipped, whether there were enough nurses, whether they were enough equipment, do the villagers trust them, how do they engage? And we did a lot of on-the-ground work, like getting to know people, understanding the nuances of the issues, and how do we lend support that is direct, that is meaningful. So we bought equipment for the doctors. We shared some of the practices that hospitals have from Singapore over there.
And you're not a doctor, right?
I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse, I'm a trained engineer. And for me, I consulted with obviously the professionals and brought in the best practices there. We visited different villages, did a bit of meet the people session, shook hands. I brought, water filters just to kickstart the friendship, had to make O-rings out of bicycle tires, invited them over, brought politicians as well to kind of relaunch the hospital, so to speak. And when we did that, within 3 months, the hospital was able to deliver 30 babies, and they were able to serve a lot more people. And more importantly, I think they were able to keep the work going. So that, I think, was quite bizarre for me because I sat there wondering to myself, what did I just do? And that's where I learned the term consulting and I learned the term community building. And that was really how Solve began. I think there is a market relevance and we try to help people and businesses see that. So obviously for governments and NGOs, they want to serve the community and there's a natural relevance for that. So it's easy for us to work with them. For businesses, we help businesses to understand that, it begins with a relationship, like your relationship with your customers, and you can apply community building principles, in order to do customer retention, building more loyalty.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, you have a larger community that you can grow together with your business.
And what has Solve n+1 worked on in the past years that you have incorporated the company?
So for NGOs, some of our work includes we help them design new services, we investigate, we research, and we idea new ways that charities can serve their beneficiaries better, or more strategically and in a way that is fresh. And we try to mitigate the risk by doing this together with them. So one example would be with special needs and social inclusion, which is a very, very challenging problem statement. So how do we cultivate the right conditions such that it is possible to produce a pilot that NGOs can still stay accountable to their donors without having to take on too much risk?
Got it.
With the government, especially with certain agencies, they're very concerned about like the social impact, right? And social compact as well. Like how do you bring people together, as one nation to pursue different endeavors? So we had the chance to work with MOM for low-wage workers to figure out, how can we facilitate more rest? How can we facilitate, equitable opportunities? We worked with MSF, on like the peers network with regards to rough sleepers. How can we provide a space, a platform where partners can come together, share ideas and best practices? And of course, for businesses, like we work with different tech startups to help them take product to market. We work with, hospitality industries, help them rethink, their reopening strategy in a time of COVID, right? How can they innovate? We are industry agnostic, so we serve almost any industry, and it makes it quite a vibrant environment because we learn many different things.
Fantastic.
Along the way.
Yeah, and there's one initiative or passion project that you guys have done also, right. And I have the book with me right now. So it's Beneath the Rug, guys. Take a look. This really nice yellow book. Tell us a little bit about this initiative that you have.
Beneath the Rug is a set of 30 stories that outlines the social sectors in Singapore. We use storytelling as a way to help people understand what social work or social work practitioners, go through.
And it's so important, right? Because social workers these days are feeling so much of the burnout. Resources are very thin.
Exactly.
And there is an incessant demand for people looking for help.
Yes. And we wanted a way that is less intense. Like sometimes when you hear like sad stories, it feels very intense. So we try to use storytelling as a way to create safety so that readers can really understand what goes on, on a day-to-day basis, so that there's greater appreciation, more mindfulness. You can check out our website. The first chapter is free.
Okay.
So I think this is quite quite an adequate read to understand like all the different social work or types of social work that are present.
I find that this book is also very interesting in a way that it presents the human side of things, right? When we look at social work, it is about beneficiaries, what kind of impact has been achieved. It is quite a human touch career or profession, but I guess this storytelling is a very good way to bring certain points across without sounding perhaps angry, disgruntled.
I mean, there are a lot of dilemmas that people face on a day-to-day basis, and I think that's what makes the work, human, that while they are trying to make things better for the vulnerable, it's not always as straightforward.
So speaking of not so straightforward, in terms of providing assistance to people in need, you started this other initiative called the Open Home Network with your wife. Fantastic initiative. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I think the Open Home Network just began with a shared idea of like hospitality and community. So we got to know a couple called Kenneth as well and Adeline, which is they run something called The Last Resort, where they indiscriminately open their doors to anybody in need.
Okay.
And take care of them.
Fantastic.
And we were just inspired not by the fact that they have opened their place, but really the presence of a community. So one of the folks that we've hosted was a Pakistani family that suffered from cancer and they needed treatment, and there was very few options where they could have adequate shelter where, they can fulfill the medical needs of the son. And we happened to be present for them. And this was something that my wife and I decided to do. And in serving them, we realized that the community is a lot more flexible, right? As compared to formal support. And as a result of that, is there a way for us to kind of build this or interpret this kind of Kampung spirit? Where whole communities can come together to just support people in crisis. A common example I used to give people is family violence don't turn fatal overnight. Like it's progressive. It starts, with just a slap on the wrist. Within 1 to 2 years, it becomes a lot more aggressive. This is one of those days that I wish Singaporeans would be more capable. And I think it will be very useful to intervene, on such matters where the community can come together in a restorative manner to serve one another, to provide safe spaces so that people can feel protected there.
Because the idea here is carving out safe spaces of your own and extend it to people in need. And we've spoken in the beginning of this podcast that COVID-19 has really affected a lot of people in the whole process of the lockdown, and people keep getting, restless at home, and that resulted in a rise in domestic violence, for example.
Yes. So we took our time to develop the community model. But when COVID struck, it accelerated the process really quickly. So we partnered with Homeless Hearts of Singapore that made a call for families to open up their homes. We had 160 families responded, and we knew that we had to try it since there were people stepping forward. And it happened at a time where it was not convenient. Like you couldn't even sleep rough on the streets. You had to go somewhere. So it was quite an opportunity to test it alongside like great initiatives like S3Ps, which is officers or religious institutions that doubled up as shelters, to kind of provide people in need that is timely. So that was kind of how we started.
How big is an issue of homelessness in Singapore?
That's really a question of how we define homelessness.
Go ahead.
I think in the States, homelessness are usually caused due to PTSD. I think if you go to Seattle, it's very well researched that majority of the homelessness are folks that came back from war, and because of PTSD, they couldn't retain stability, and therefore things started to decline how they got homeless. Homelessness in a third world nation is also very different. It's usually people without shelter. In Singapore, it's a lot more complicated. If you speak to anybody that is homeless and you ask them for their IC, 10 out of 10 times you're going to get an address on their IC. And they either struggle with, a fight with their wives, family violence, and it all varies. Like every single case will vary, from each other. So in the rough sleeper study that we found, I think this was in 2017, they found 1,000 rough sleepers. But in our case, when we identified homelessness, we call them people in crisis. And that really changed the way we factored people who needed a safe space. So one example is COVID alone has led to, I think, almost 400 calls of family violence where the home is no longer a safe space. And we believe that those are folks that are also in crisis and will benefit from having like a shelter. Mothers who, are unwed mothers, and they have children and the family, have locked them out of the house. We have, elderlies that are sort of have a strange relationship with their children and couldn't stay anymore. So by that definition, we believe that there's anywhere between 6 to 10,000 people at any one time that is in crisis that would benefit, from having a safe space.
Nice. And how does the process of matching families to people in need in that platform that you're creating?
So we onboard host family by helping them understand what hosting means, and we help them dream together about hospitality. So with every host, we encourage them to bring their friends in to support. So even though they don't provide shelters, they'll provide everything else like friendship, food, whatever that is necessary. Matching, we take a less scientific approach. We treat it a lot like dating.
Okay.
So you don't go home on the first date.
Do you have chemistry?
Yeah, correct. So because of that, we have a more light-hearted approach towards it. We start with befriending, getting to know each other, their interests, their stories. And then on the side, as we arrange for a second meet, we'll talk about needs. Like, what do you need? How can we support you? If the needs are really urgent, we'll try to speed up the process.
Okay.
Sometimes we try not to, because at the end of the day, hosts are not shelters.
Yes.
They are families.
Yes.
And they provide more than just a space. They provide a relationship.
Precisely. They are not shelters, but at the same time, they're not Airbnb as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's kind of like in the middle, a space between, having to build friendship, relationship.
Yes, correct.
And also providing very functional help to people in need. Is that sticky ground to be at? Because there will be feelings involved. What if, let's say, I am a person in need, and then I don't get chosen to have somewhere to stay, for example? Or like, I am a host and I really want to help this particular person, but perhaps there is not a fit for me as a host. Perhaps my house is too small. I don't have the conditions that require sufficient help, assistance to this person. So how do you navigate that?
We actively acknowledge that it's not going to be easy, and we reframe the metric for success, especially for our host. So we tell our hosts that we don't always have it our way. Sometimes we fight with our parents, and things don't work out, and that's the reality of being with a community. So with every match, it's not going to work out. And if it's not going to work out, it doesn't mean you have not succeeded. We had a host that was so gracious and patient. She took in a 19-year-old boy for a full 1 year.
Wow.
And that relationship didn't work out. Like, it didn't pan out. Eventually, we couldn't keep because he wasn't, adhering to specific rules, and it's causing the host a lot of stress. And we had to plan an exit for him. While she grieved the fact that he didn't really appreciate that, her. But what happened next was he was actually emotionally stable enough, and he reconciled with his family, which was initially thought to be not possible.
Wow.
Because of the estranged relationship. So a lot of times when it comes to community matters, because things are so organic and flexible, it also suggests to us that anything is possible. And we acknowledge that, and we help people understand that mess is part of that process, and there is also beauty, in that mess.
You seem like a very positive person where you see a lot of challenges to be of opportunity, right? How would you recommend or advise modern Singaporeans who are so stressed out with our modern day living, right? Who want to have our privacy and at the same time a little bit maybe distrusting towards strangers? How can you encourage them to maybe open their heart up and then perhaps be more hospitable and advocate for the practice of Kampung spirit?
I think Singaporeans or people in general, we are wired to connect. Like, as much as we tell people that there are a lot more introverts than extroverts in the world, which is a statistical fact, we are wired to connect. Like, we desire companionship, we desire friendship. And I think in the past, we did it out of necessity. So if you think with me, back in the Kampung days, I can't afford a lock. There's no, like, even if I can afford it, I can't buy security cameras because the technology was just not available. So I had to know my neighbors in order to feel safe. Right?
And usually they don't lock the door.
Exactly. So that was then. But today we have the technology and we can afford it. And the trade-off as a result of that is there's no longer a necessity to connect. But it doesn't mean that there's no value to doing so. And I think it takes intentionality to practice, and it can be a very fulfilling process. So I have a really good relationship with my neighbors, and when my neighbors' kids get bullied at school, they'll come to me and I'll bring them to McDonald's, and we'll have chats and all, and it becomes very life-giving. Like, you feel happy seeing them. Like, my home is no longer just a place that I go. It becomes more like this. And that, of course, comes with mess, right? Like, you have differences in expectation. But these are things that we eventually have to manage anyway. Yeah,
fantastic. And what plans do you have for Open Home Network in the next few months?
So right now we are in the middle of launching the Open Home Network 2.0 version. And this is a pilot that we are doing in specific localities. what we have found in the first version is we did it island-wide and anybody could come in. It was logistically very painful because we had to cater to the whole island at one go, and it was very difficult to stitch the right volunteers. Like if I get volunteers from Jurong, then to go all to Tampines, it just didn't make sense. This time around, we are doing it within a single location. And our hope is this: within any single district, there's at least 1% of units that are primed to host.
Nice.
So not everybody can host. Some people have children, some people, can't walk. It's not very clear, but there are seasons that work. So for instance, young couples, they just got their place, they are primed for hosting. Parents that children have been married, right? They are primed to host. And of course, you have all your in-betweens from there. So our hope is if we can convert, so within Jalan Kukoh, which is the start of our pilot, there's 2,000 units. 1% is 20 units. And if we can succeed by having 20 units step forward to host and we bring in, say, 100 volunteers to support them, then that becomes a local chapter.
Yeah.
And if that succeeds and we have the right results for it, then what we do is we start planting more chapters.
Yeah.
So I'll go to Ang Mo Kio and I'll do the same. With 4,000 units, I will pick 40, and then we'll create basically a movement that interprets like community support a bit differently. And we want to make sure that we can do this with the right rhythm of like social policies and social workers as well.
So speaking of social policies, how much support do you get perhaps from our government to kickstart this ground-up initiative?
I think the government is very encouraging of our work.
Encouraging.
So they let us, try all these things within reason. And we are thankful that they do communicate to us some of the concerns that they have. So things like what we do is highly non-transactional. Like it's based on trust, it's based on relationships. And sometimes it's hard to conceive, right? Because if I have somebody staying with me, is it a rental arrangement? How do I navigate this? So we consult the government quite often to acknowledge some of these tensions and to weave some of these limitations that policies have. So for instance, if I'm by law, right, you are a youth up to the age of 19, meaning that if I'm a youth that is in a home, up to the age of 19, I can get supported. Once I hit 20, the law sees you as an adult. And therefore, where does the support end? The policies got updated. For women, I think they pushed the age, as long as you're onboarded early, they push it to 21, I believe. But where does it end, right?
Correct.
But in the context of a family, it doesn't matter. Like you can be 19, you can be 21. As long as I know you and I support you, then I can serve you, and if you can marry that together with the policies, I think you can create a much more cohesive, holistic support.
And in terms of transparency or even governance, how do you vet people who really need that kind of support, or even vet the host who are able to provide that kind of support?
Right. This is why our work with SSAs are very important. So SSAs are social service agencies. We work with social workers, family service centers, partly because we can tap onto their infrastructure, their case management model, and there is this support that can be provided for an organic movement. So it's a bit of structure that the organic movement can rely on. And it's really about being able to foster and facilitate some form of healthy engagement, set of engagement rules.
Any plans to perhaps turn this initiative into a charity or a non-profit social enterprise?
For now, I think we like that it's a community movement. Our objective and goal is to write and research as much as possible so that we tell Singaporeans that we have done it and it works, and here's the data, here's the research, and there's credibility. And we have intentionally made it such that anybody and everyone who wants to start it can just pick up all our materials, pick up all our policies, and just roll it out, for themselves. And I think that is our hope, that we don't want to create a centralized base, right? We want it to be decentralized so that more people can take ownership.
How do you define fulfillment in your career and in your work in the social sector? Because earlier on you mentioned about changing our definition and matrix of success right? Building relationship with both hosts as well as beneficiaries. Then what about your thoughts on your own version of success in this journey that you have taken?
I really just want to make a difference. I'm reminded of, I think as you were sharing, I'm reminded of when I was younger, right, 21. I was visiting a one-room flat, and there were two specific old ladies that I would visit.
Okay.
And I'll bring them out for so-called dates lah. I think that was something that really gave me a lot of satisfaction, because sometimes in social impact, we are so quick to determine impact, which is not wrong, by the way. I think we need to demand accountability, but it's also about enjoying like the premise, like just being with them. I mean, I had the privilege of knowing them until they passed, actually. So I visited them for many years until they eventually passed on. And I was thankful for the friendship that we had, even though it was quite bizarre. They spoke to me in dialect that I couldn't understand.
Okay.
And, you know, we had this broken telephone situation and they couldn't understand each other as well. But it's kind of the sentiment that I felt.
Yeah, connection, love, sentiments transcends language.
Yeah. And for sure, there is this aspect of like quantitative impact. You know, it's these experiences that kept me going. And of course, for us, we try to balance the two as much as we can, you know, as we with whatever projects that we operate.
Right. And what do you wish for people in your industry to start or stop doing?
In today's world, we try and include purpose into our businesses, and there's a very intentional approach to doing it. One of the things that I really hope for is for people to see that actually profit and purpose are two sides to the same coin. Like just because I pursue profits doesn't mean I compromise on my purpose. And I think that there are many brilliant examples that fulfill that. So Indomie, for instance, one of their biggest market is in Nigeria, where the annual turnover is $1 billion.
Oh, I never realized.
Right?
Indomie.
And
wow.
Back then when they started, Nigerian thought that they were served to worms, right? And they have been there for 30 years. Can you imagine the amount of jobs they have created?
Yeah.
You know, in 30 years, you know, the amount of food solutions to solve hunger.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, the impact that like solving hunger or managing hunger can create. And I think when businesses learn to see the fact that if they continuously provide value to their clients, they also create impact.
Yeah.
And the more conscious we are about it, I think it's possible to create a more woven version of purpose and profit.
Any advice for people who want to also start their ground-up initiative?
I think one of the things that I do hope for is that people would reach out and connect. We live in a time where a lot of the social impact practitioners are serving the community so much that there's nobody that they can connect with.
Yeah. And this is the origin of your book, right?
Yes, exactly.
Social worker.
I think we also need to demand understanding so that with understanding, we can forge stronger relationship with each other. And that way we can support and serve one another well. So for instance, we will ask what's so unique about our initiative as compared to others. And our reply will always be every initiative is important and we have considered that in designing the Open Home Network. So that there is a complementary marriage, right, across all the different moves. And we're not competing, like we're not in competition because we're trying to solve like the same problem. And I think learning to intentionally reach out and connect, it plays a very important part, you know, of it.
Nice. And lastly, how can our audience find Open Home Network as well as lend their support for your cause?
Right. You can find us on Facebook. I think there's an Open Home Network Facebook page. You can check us out on Solve as well.
Okay, it'll be here.
In the link.
Link below.
We are looking for a lot of volunteers. The many hands make less work. So yeah, please reach out to us.
And any other exciting plans that you have moving forward?
We are very excited about the kind of progress we can make. Right now, we are trying to look at what social integration looks like for persons with special needs above the age of 18. And inclusion is really a very complicated word because the more intentional I am about including, sometimes that itself is quite exclusive. So we are working with different charities to see what kind of conditions we can create such that the communities can have inclusivity that is present. So we are collaborating with Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy.
Fantastic.
So I think that's quite exciting. And many others, I think I mentioned before that we are sort of a bit of a professional jungle basher.
Yeah.
Like we try and navigate the unknown, which is the N portion. And we take on a lot of these challenges because the people that matters to us and because we care about them, that's the intentionality we take.
Wow. Thank you on behalf of our audience and also the society at large for the service that you provide. I really wish you and your team all the very best for the upcoming initiatives that you are going to roll out.
No, thank you for hosting us. It's been a privilege to be here, and I appreciate what Epic Nation is trying to achieve.
If you have enjoyed our conversation with Kenneth and want to learn more about the social impact space, please leave a comment, like, and subscribe to our channel on all platforms that this podcast is on so that we can deliver new content to you. Epic Nation is a passion project created by the team at Epic Dialogue, a Singapore-based marketing agency that helps change-making businesses create social impact through our sustainability branding, communications, and digital marketing solutions.